Hello, everyone. Welcome to the last session of the Connecticut Affordable Housing Conference. I am Kayla. I'm a senior manager at the Partnership for Strong Communities, and I am so excited to introduce this last session titled Community Housing Connections, Old Use and Adaptive Reuse. This session is sponsored by Housing Enterprises, Inc., and thank you to all of our other sponsors that have helped make the past 2 days of sessions possible. We could not do it without your support. And now I am going to stop sharing and I will hand it over to Phoebe.
Okay, so welcome everyone. Thank you for joining. Again, this is Community Housing Connections, Old Use and Adaptive Reuse. And our conversation today is focused on adaptive reuse in suburban and rural communities. So thank you all for joining us. I'm really excited about the conversation we're going to be having and about the panelists that we'll be hearing from. We'll start today with some introductions. So I am Phoebe Plouffe. I'm a program officer for housing and capacity building at LISC, Connecticut, and I'll be getting us started today. So LISC, or Local Initiative Support Corporation, is a CDFI, or a Community Development Financial Institution, that was founded in 1979 with a mission to collaborate with residents and partners to build resilient and inclusive communities across the nation, making them great places to live, work, visit, do business, and raise families. LISC provides community development services by acting as an investor, a connector, and an innovator through our programming. Although we're a national nonprofit organization, our 36 local offices across the nation allow us to specialize in providing local expertise, forming and convening an extensive partner network in each of the areas that we operate, and working to ensure financial inclusion through all of our initiatives. At the LISC Connecticut office, we have several focus areas, providing assistance through community economic and workforce development with our financial opportunity centers, working to bolster child daycare centers through our child care programming. We provide capacity building through our supportive programming like the Housing and Community Development Leadership Institute, or HCDLI, and affordable housing technical assistance and capacity building through our Community Housing Connections program. Community Housing Connections is a program supported by the Connecticut Project that provides technical assistance, capacity building, and lending opportunities to groups in suburban and rural communities throughout the state who are interested in developing affordable housing. The program works by partnering with local groups of residents, municipal staff, community development corporations, or development groups to act as an intermediary, providing resources, partnerships, and early stage lending opportunities that kickstart affordable housing projects and provide invaluable assistance to groups early on in their conceptualization. And with that introduction, let's roll a little bit into our discussion for today. So finding creative and unique ways to build affordable housing throughout Connecticut is paramount to increasing housing options for all, which is why we wanted to talk about one of those creative ways today by addressing and discussing adaptive use in existing and underutilized properties, particularly those in suburban and rural areas of our state. We brought together a panel of wonderful practitioners from across the state and beyond who are in the midst of active adaptive reuse projects and experiencing many of the things that we'll discuss today in real time. With that, I'll turn it over to our panelists to introduce themselves. We'll start with Andrea and Carla. Can you tell us a bit about who you are, your organization, and the adaptive reuse project that you're working on currently in Connecticut? Andrea, would you like to start?
Sure. My name is Andrea Kretschmer, and I'm a principal at Zenolith Partners. We are developers of affordable, supportive, and mixed income housing in New York City, upstate in the Capital District, in central Connecticut, and then more so now along the shoreline. We've been in business since 2016. My experience before that was with other development firms. We have about 1,200 units that we've completed. Some of them are adaptive reuse, and we have several hundred more, like the one that you'll hear about today, in the pipeline. So, Carla, do you maybe want to introduce yourself, and then you can jump in to talk about the project?
Sure. My mouse works to unmute myself. Carla Lundquist, I'm the executive director of Hope Partnership. Hope is a more than 20-year-old nonprofit that works on the shoreline in Lower Middlesex County. We are a developer, owner, and facilitator of affordable housing, and we work exclusively in this region. So we consider ourselves experts on our local communities. And that's why we're really excited to do our first project in Clinton, which is the Pearson School redevelopment. And this rendering right here is what the street view of the project will look like when construction is finished. It's going to be 50 units of studio and one bedroom apartments, rental apartments, deed restricted affordable, and they are going to be senior preference. Another component of this project that's very exciting is that there actually is going to be another component of the development. The front area to the left is actually going to be utilized by the town of Clinton to have dedicated senior center and senior programming space. And so this is a really good example of utilizing existing municipal buildings to benefit the public in more than one way.
Thank you, Andrea and Carla, and thank you for telling us a little bit about the project just to start. We're very happy to have you today, but before we go any further with questions, I want to turn it over to Kevin and Chris to introduce themselves, their organizations, and talk a little bit about the project that they're working on in Winstead.
Okay,
Go
I'll
ahead, Kevin.
introduce myself and
Yep,
then
go ahead.
Chris could go ahead and talk more about the project. But Kevin Taylor, sorry, I can't even get my name correct today. Executive Director of NEST. We're a community development corporation that's based in Waterbury. We focus on affordable housing development, housing education, and counseling. We have our community building and empowerment program and lending. And Chris, you can go ahead.
Sure. Thanks, Kevin. My name is Chris Griffin. I'm the Executive Director of the Winstead Health Center. Obviously, as the name leads, we are in Winstead, Connecticut. Currently, I operate a health center, which was previously the Winstead Memorial Hospital. It's about 86,000 square feet of space that is about 10% occupied right now. We currently have the community-based outpatient clinic for the Veterans Administration, and that will stay as the project redevelops into what we're going to have. It'll be 40 units of affordable housing. There will be an emphasis on veterans, but it's affordable housing across the board for everyone. And what makes this project, similarly to what the previous project said, is a little transformative and innovative is 2/3 of it is housing, but the other third of it is an innovation center. We have partnered with the local community college, CT State Northwestern, as well as Tunxis, the local high schools and K through 12. To provide trainings, workforce development. We're working with local manufacturers to provide job relevant training to upskill people who not only live on site, but also are in the community. So it's open to everybody. So we're really excited. The project's a couple years in the making, so we're ready to get it going.
Awesome. Thank you so much. We've got some really exciting projects to talk about today, so I'm excited to get into the conversation. With that, I'll turn it over to my colleague and our panel moderator for today, Elizabeth Vinnick.
Thank you very much. When we were looking to participate in this conference, it became very clear that the adaptive reuse of properties is a really important way for us to be thinking about building affordable housing in communities with structures that already exist, that may be vacant, that need renovation, but that are also at key locations in the community, usually near services, near transportation, near town centers. So I'd like to ask both of you, maybe starting with Andrea and Carla, when you're thinking about adaptive reuse of existing properties, why is that important to you? Why do you think that from a development point of view that's a good strategy to implement?
Well, shall I start?
Yeah, sure.
So one of the quirks of our business is that we get a lot of our work through RFPs. So a lot of times the direction comes from the town or the municipality itself. And there's a building like the Abraham Pearson School that is out of service but has value, sentimental and historic value for the community. And so repurposing it into affordable housing seems like the most straightforward and beneficial approach that we could take. The transit-oriented development, as you mentioned, is a huge part of it, and access to other services. Carla, is there anything
Yeah,
that you
I
want to
think
add?
the biggest piece of adaptive reuse that really hits for us with our mission. We work exclusively in high opportunity, small and medium-sized towns in our region, and the built environment is very important to the folks that live in these towns. And so we find that adaptive reuse works a lot better to feel comfortable with the existing community because it's already part of the landscape. It's already part of their built environment. They're used to it, they drive by it. In some cases, it's a huge improvement on their built environment, right? You take a building that may be slightly blighted, not Pearson in this case. Pearson's in great shape, but in general, sometimes that can happen, right? You have a defunct building that is maybe an eyesore, maybe something that the community doesn't want to see anymore. And if you can take it and improve it, that's a huge win. And so when you're talking about something like affordable housing that in the past was a little bit more controversial, we know now that it's something we need. And I think it's a lot easier for folks to understand that need. But if you put it in to an existing envelope at an existing building, then I think that is a much easier thing for folks to get used to.
There's often an
Kevin,
emotional connection to it too, where there were people in Clinton who went to school here as fourth and fifth graders. And now they're seniors and they don't want to see that building disappear. The other thing that I wanted to add to what Carla said is there's a sustainability feature to reusing an existing building. So it may or may not be less expensive to do adaptive reuse than it is to build new, but the idea of reusing those materials rather than increasing our carbon footprint by demolishing and then building new is also an important factor.
And I think we'll get into this a little bit later, but I think, in terms of challenges, acquisition cost is always tricky too right now. And so we'll get back to that when we go forward. But Kevin and Chris, some of these themes ring true for you as well. Can you talk a little bit about why it's an important option for you with this adaptive reuse project? I guess, Kevin, why don't you go first?
Okay, yeah. Well, I'm going to put my green hat on, and Andrea just kind of mentioned it. I think one of the biggest things is that it significantly reduces the carbon dioxide emitted during the manufacturing and transportation and the construction of building materials. And of course, by not demolishing the building, you dramatically cutting down on construction and demolition waste that is going to go into a landfill. I think the other thing about it is that it injects new life into use the vacant buildings, of course, enhancing, depending on where these buildings are located, but definitely enhancing safety and supporting local businesses in that town. Many older buildings are more in an established sort of community or location with existing access to transit and infrastructure, amenities, and jobs. And I'm an urban guy, so I'm not one who wants to sort of contribute to this sort of sprawl. So keeping things as centrally located as much as possible is great. I think another thing I will add is that most cases it's a reduced timeline when you're dealing with an existing building. So the project can be completed faster than building from scratch, and because you don't have to worry about things like the foundation and the structural shell. You got your essential infrastructure already in place. Chris, I don't know if you want to add anything else.
The only thing I could add that would be of meaning is just to say I echo everything that everybody else has said. I mean, I'm from the community that our building is in. I've been the executive director here for 18 years. So I know what the building means to the people around us. You can see it from the high school. You can see it from the charter school next door. It's a really big piece of the history. It was a hospital in 1902 and has been operating ever since. which is why when the Winston Memorial Hospital went bankrupt, a group of community volunteers got together and actually purchased it out of bankruptcy court to then create the nonprofit Winston Health Center to continue to provide a space to provide medical services and health services to the community. So to keep with that tradition that's always been there, right? Trying to come up with a way that we're relevant in this times and provide a need that there is, is something that was really important. So I think that community piece is huge.
Chris,
And I would just add one other
oh,
quick thing. I was just thinking, also, like when you're dealing with old buildings, there's some like distinctive, unique character about that building. And so transforming those spaces into housing also then lends to
Right.
creating these sort of
Yeah.
creative and character-rich.
Architecture, yeah. So architecturally, we matched the college, we matched the charter school, we matched the library. We're going to keep that, and we're not going to change that in one of the buildings that we have. It's going to remain that look, so it continues to match the other buildings from that time period around town. So, like I said, I think that's a huge benefit.
Oh, that's great. Chris, I wanted to follow up with you on the foundation a little bit. Often it's municipalities that are issuing RFPs for properties, but in this case, my understanding, and if you could talk about it a little more, this was a foundation that was created to sort of think about the next life for the hospital. And you
Right.
have a little bit of funds, but you're really looking at it from a different point of view because you've done some visioning about what the community wants, and now you're still involved. It's not
Right.
just letting go.
Yeah, we're not going to let go. That's one thing that makes our project pretty unique, right? We already own the building, so we don't have to acquire anything. There's nothing that, we own the land, we own the building. The same group will take over. We'll probably change name, but yeah, that's exactly right. So we've had a board of directors that, has been part of this vision for a long time. And when we had Charlotte Hungerford Hospital operating an emergency room 7 days a week, 365 days a year, and when they partnered with Hartford Healthcare and moved off our campus, it then again left this board, right, to look at what can we do now with this space so that we can still be relevant in our community and provide services. And so, there went the talking to the COG and talking to the community to see what the needs really were.
So Kevin, for a development entity, is that advantageous for you to have a partner that has already done this kind of work and has sort of laid a foundation? Is that something that
Yeah, I think it's huge, right? I mean, I think it's pretty vital. I mean, I don't have the experience in any type of redevelopment per se, right? So that's when we partnered with Kevin and Ness because they do have that experience. And actually I have a pretty diverse team of people on our redevelopment team. We're working with Grow America. We're working with Housing Enterprises. We're working with Nest. We have somebody from the college on board. So we have quite the team working to make this happen.
Okay. I'm going to move on to the next question. We've covered this a little bit already, but looking for good candidates for adaptive reuse projects, or when you're looking for projects and an adaptive reuse opportunity comes up, what are the things that really cause you to drill down and really get serious about a project like this? Andrea, Carla?
Well, I think one thing is building condition, and we've talked about access to transit. That's another thing, obviously, and Kevin mentioned sort of being on a main street corridor, right? You want things to be centrally located, but building condition's a huge one. I mean, I've been in buildings that have plants growing, trees growing through the windows and things like that. And when you walk in as a developer to a building like that, you start getting nervous, right? And so if you're not a developer and you're taking inventory of town-owned properties or privately owned but currently unused properties in a municipality, you want to be thinking to yourself, what's the condition of this building before you start shopping it around? Because I think you need to be realistic about what the interest is going to look like. Because the more a building has degraded, the more difficult and more expensive it is going to be to redevelop it. And therefore, the less likely you are to see the project you necessarily want to see, and the less likely you are to have a variety of different options to choose from.
So when you say what would the interest be, are you talking about potential partners? And maybe this is a good time to talk about the importance of finding partners with adaptive reuse projects.
Right. So when I say what the interest would be, I mean the interest from the either, I mean, quite frankly, any entity, but whether it's public or private, because the reality is public entities have to make a project pencil out too, right? They have to be able to financially make it work. And so that I think is a big part of it, right? Thinking about how do you bring this from, conception to actually being created. And there are a lot of buildings that are great in concept and that would be beautiful projects if money were no object, but it is. And so that's why I think it's really important to think about building quality and how long it's been mothballed, right? So Pearson, for instance, was a working school until 2019, and then the town of Clinton has maintained it really well. And so that's not a long time, right? There are buildings in some of our urban centers that have been mothballed for 40 years, right? And like those are going to be challenging and expensive to redevelop.
Kevin,
Schools
Chris,
yeah.
Andrea?
I just say schools are
Yeah.
great, like the classroom size, especially in a town like Clinton where it's a pretty small school. It's 3 stories and it's got these very generous classrooms with windows from like waist height to, I don't know if they're 14 feet or 16 feet. I mean, it's glorious inside those classrooms. So they convert very nicely, especially for seniors if you're doing studios and ones. Some of the mill buildings are more challenging in that they're so deep. And of course, there's a certain amount of livable space that you're allowed to count before you need to get to the next occurrence of light and air. And so in some instances, you end up with units that are preposterously deep, but they don't count as inhabitable FAR, but you're giving them to your tenants, your residents anyway. There are some instances where the buildings are so big that they're being cored out in the center, so almost like making a donut out of it. We've never taken that on. It's an expense that an affordable deal in our universe doesn't sustain. It's happening more, I think, in some of the bigger suburban areas where there are malls or office buildings or former hotels that are ready to be converted. But schools, really nice.
Yeah, I would add, so just a little bit about me. My background's in architecture and going through architecture school and even practicing a little bit. I used to hate old buildings. I could care, for the most part, I could care less about historic buildings. But then my very first project when I started to make a shift was the redevelopment, or not the redevelopment, but the rehab of Waterbury City Hall. And so I gained a different or a new appreciation for historic buildings. Which is why I enjoy working with Chris on this particular project. So I'll just add some things that Carla and Andrew didn't mention. Ceiling height is key. When you're talking about having to implement new MEP systems, having a good ceiling height allows for those new systems to go in and still get a good amount of ceiling height when it's all said and done. Always looking at architectural features for me. So, there's just certain things that or I shouldn't say we, but well, we as a world really don't have the craftsmanship to make, or we just don't do that type of construction anymore. So, you got the high quality of materials. Maybe it could be like marble or brick or stone or some woodwork or other architectural details. In the case of this Winstead project, the views, how it sits up on the hill, is a very, very attractive thing to want to take on this project and turn it into another use. The historic value, as Chris mentioned earlier, some of these buildings have a certain sort of culture or heritage to the fabric of that community, and so I can just imagine with the hospital how many people in Connecticut will say, hey, my such and such was born here, so forth and so on. So instead of tearing it down and building something new, trying to just keep what you have and make it better, and people can still come around and talk about the memories I hate to visit that somebody may died in that particular hospital, but anyway. And then other things that I would also say, you got to make sure that these buildings align, and I think maybe Andrea or Carla mentioned this, but needs to align with the local market needs. So definitely having those conversations with the local municipality is very important. And then, I mean, I guess that's all I have now. Chris, I don't know if you wanted to add anything.
No, I think you guys have mentioned it all.
Yeah.
You know, one of the things that that I think about a lot is that existing properties are on the marketplace and they're for sale. But there's a lot of competition for sites right now, and so that information that you just provided is really helpful in terms of fine tuning what you're looking for at a first glance. But then you get into the project, and then you start to check the title, check the property, do a property needs assessment, and you're starting to put your capital stack together. What are some of the challenges with adaptive reuse that would be good lessons for people to hear as they're thinking about doing a project like this? And I'm thinking about things like title challenges or unexpected costs. And I'm not sure who'd like to answer this one first, but please jump in, Carla.
Well, the town of Clinton was very upfront with Pearson that there was a deed restriction. And so that's something that as a development team, we didn't have any part of working through that deed restriction, but it was another layer for the town of Clinton to work through while we were on our parallel track in pre-development. And so those are the types, and this deed restriction, I think, was established in the 40s. So these are things where it's probably not going to be top of mind for anybody because it was established, 80 years ago. And so those are that's an example, of something that you might run into that you would probably not run into with, a greenfield development.
Kevin
Yep.
and Chris, for the hospital, what about change? Are people pushing against this project? Do you hear resistance about the idea of it? Is there
We're so lucky. We're oh boy, we're so lucky. We haven't had any. We've done 3 community charrettes. We've brought everybody in. We took what they said and put it into the plans. We even went to the town, to the Board of Selectmen to ask for a tax abatement, and that was passed. I mean, we really have the support, and I'm going to go back to that historic feeling of the build. First of all, they don't want another vacant building. Nobody wants another vacant building. There's too many already. And secondly, again, that connection that everybody has to the property itself, to the buildings themselves. So we've been very lucky, very lucky.
In both projects, do the sellers, in quotes, have expectations for earning revenue from the project? Because that's another place where there can be challenges. Is the health foundation or the hospital looking to sell this for a price? How did the negotiations in the town go?
No, because the hospital, so it's the Winston Health Center. We're going to maintain ownership. So we don't have to work. So the housing will be structured as affordable housing with a management company and bringing in the rents and continuing to take care of that part of the building. And the innovation maker space will operate as a nonprofit and operate on memberships and trainings and classes and fees for those things and grants and things of those nature, like most other nonprofits. So there's 2 entities under one roof that will work together but operate separately. It's very unique.
Andrea, this I know is a topic for you too. It depends on the project, right? It's variable.
And when your mayor or your town manager, director of economic development, and the council or board of alders or what have you, if they're all on the same page, that goes a long way towards building support among the residents who already live in that town, and also among the agencies from whom you need funding or sign-offs or entitlements or anything like that. We had on the topic of acquisition price, we had settled on a number with the city, and it was based on an appraisal, and there was a lot of thought and care that went into it. And at one of maybe 3 public meetings that we had, because in Clinton, the residents get to vote on things like the disposition of land and the awarding of a tax abatement and things like that. And there were some residents who were very upset that the property was going for too little money. And the explanation was certainly that it was based on a fair market value, but also that there's nothing else that's going to happen at that building. It's not going to be a school for many lifetimes. It's just there's no demand. The town is aging, and this is what's needed now. And so I think with the support of the town manager and having them see that Hope and Zenolith are not coming in to hit and run. We're not coming in to just make a bunch of money and disappear. We're in this for the long haul. We're both mission driven. We are committed to this part of Connecticut. So it took some conversations, but with enough support on the elected side, you can make a lot of progress, I think, with your residents, because these are their people. You know, we're new to the town, but Carla and Hope are not, and certainly they're not new to each other.
Well, and to that point, in terms of acquisition costs and pricing, as Andrea mentioned, I think one of the misconceptions around existing buildings is when people say, oh, but I looked at what it's assessed at, or we got an appraisal and it said it was worth this much. And I think what folks don't always connect is that those numbers are actually based on something different than market value, right? And so in Pearson, for Pearson as the example, one of the reasons that it's very difficult to redevelop is that there are historic components that have to be maintained and replaced, and those are expensive replacements and maintenance. And so if you were going to do something different with this building, not make it a school, to Andrea's point, it doesn't need to be a school anymore in terms of demand. It's very expensive. And so that means that you can't buy a property for as much as someone might think if you have to spend so much money rehabbing it based on these standards that are established not by the developer, but by state and federal guidelines.
I'd like to talk quickly before we move to Q&A about mixed use properties, especially since it's in both cases it's the same structure that you're talking about, and how that complicates things with your financial transaction. I know in both cases you're working on finalizing plans and moving forward. So I don't know which of you would like to go first, but please jump in.
I mean, I'm willing to jump in. I'm not sure exactly what you're looking at. I mean, that's true. I think for us, the community investment fund was a big part of our plan. They were looking for projects that would not otherwise, at least when it started, not otherwise be funded by traditional funding sources, and that our project was very innovative and very transformative. It's not just housing, or it's not just, a community type room. We were doing 2 very, very big things, also keeping the veterans clinic on site. So we have the community investment fund, which can help both sides financially. However, the Department of Housing is only for the housing side of things. So being able to kind of subsidize some of the funding and make all the funding, the stack of funding work. At least this is my first go around, right, in this type of experience. So it's been really enlightening, to say the least. I don't know, Kevin, if you want to add to.
No, it's. I'm trying to figure out the best way to say it. So housing is simple to some extent. Funding wise, the funding pieces, where to go for it. Whether you can make get enough funding for the particular actual construction is a whole nother story. And then in some cases, if a building is historic, then there's an opportunity for, state and federal tax credits. Unfortunately, that's not our situation with the hospital. But then you have this other third, which is sort of a more complex piece, and and trying to find the funding sources that would support that has been a challenge. In some cases, we've been able to close the gap tremendously, but we still have about 1 million or so. Correct me if I'm wrong, Chris, on that. But we're still trying to. We have a small piece that we need to close, and so Chris has been working along with Grow America to have these conversations with various different state entities to figure out how to close it. But I think the one thing, our mixed use or the piece that is not residential is somewhat unique in a sense, having a manufacturing sort of shop below housing units. But when you think of other mixed use developments, they usually may have some sort of commercial or retail space, which is probably easier to explain in some ways as to why those are there, because if you got 40 plus units or 100 units, whatever the number may be, you got a coffee shop downstairs, you got a child care center, you have whatever it may be, there's all sort of built-in residents that are going to support that, plus what's going on around the property with the community as well, supporting those type of businesses. So.
The challenges of the mixed use, of financing the mixed use at the school, is that because the senior center is going to be operated by the town, that's considered a public works project, and we're going to be paying prevailing wage. And that's not to say that we are in any way opposed to paying prevailing wage. We would love to be paying everybody prevailing wage and beyond, but the funding sources just don't accommodate that. So we're working on sort of titrating our way to a happy place of how can we afford it and how much of the facility can be built that way. So just having the mixed sources. So Kevin, each of those sources, you could have 6 or 7 or 8 sources in your capital stack, and many of them will have their own requirements around wage or MWBE participation, local hiring, things like that. So it's a lot of moving parts.
And God forbid if you ever trigger the Davis-Bacon wage.
And I just want to make a quick plug that we work in a region where there are no Connecticut Investment Fund SIF communities. And so for a project like this, that becomes more challenging, right? Because that's a bucket of money that the town of Clinton can't access. And so if there are any state folks, CGA or DCD folks listening in, maybe we need to look at what that means for some of these higher opportunity towns where we want to put more housing. Maybe this is a way to make that easier, right? If we can get some more funding for mixed use work, because to Andrea and Kevin's point, the housing part's easy. Those funding streams are very well understood, and everybody knows how to put those sources together. But it's when there's this other thing, it just becomes more complicated.
What can you do up front to structure things so that it becomes more simple? Are there, lessons learned and maybe on this topic or other topics that would be worth sharing?
I have a couple. One is just start early with SHPO and the National Park Service if you're doing historic tax credits, because they're very, very experienced professionals and they're very detail oriented. And so we always want to, we want to get that right. And then another thing is just making sure that your partner, if you are not the local group, making sure that your partner has great relationships in the town, and that includes their prior experience with their projects well received, and then with current administration. You don't want to have to start from scratch if you're also bringing them what could be a challenging project.
if you're somebody who's releasing an RFP for redevelopment of a building, I think a really important thing is to A, give respondents a long enough time period to put together the level of detail that you are asking for in your RFP. And the other really important thing is to communicate to whatever constituency or the public that are invested in the results of this RFP that this is going to be an ongoing communicative process and it's iterative and it may change slightly because things come up and redevelopment is not as straightforward as regular development. And so that means that there is going to be a weird third thing that happens that nobody anticipated. And you have to all the parties, including the public or whatever constituencies are watching it, have to know that that's a possibility and that everyone needs to work through it together. Because I think one of the challenges for developers is that at the beginning of a project, you put something forward, and then 3 years later, when the project starts to really get momentum, things change in the world. And so it needs to be understood that it's iterative.
Yeah, I think that's really important, actually. I think that's a really big thing.
And I would add, I don't think it was mentioned, but just dealing with old buildings, you're going to have some environmental challenges or issues more than likely. So trying to get a understanding of that stuff up front is very helpful and useful. And there's dollars that you can receive either through your local COG or DEEP or EPA, so forth. So because especially if you're converting this stuff over to residential, you're literally going to have to eat off the floor, eat off the ground. So you're going to have to make sure that the site and the building, that you identify all of the issues and know what that cost is going to be up front to deal with it. So.
Elizabeth, you're muted. We do have a question in the chat if you're
In the
ready
chat,
to
yeah.
throw it over.
Yeah, so I want to kind of break this into a couple of different sections. It's what do you suggest for people who want to support this type of housing solution? And I think we can sort of break this into two parts. One is just the average the community resident who might have an idea, but then also maybe professionals who would like to get something started. Maybe people in municipalities who have an idea.
Well, I would just say that one of our local COGs, the River COG, was working on an inventory of buildings in their region and trying to put together different attributes that the buildings or the parcels had. And so I think maybe getting engaged with your COG is a great first step to say, hey, have you done any work on site selection or development parcels? Do you have a list of things of parcels or buildings that might be good for redevelopment, or even just browsing to see what's out there in the town, either in the private market or public buildings that your town might be interested to redevelop. And then quite frankly, in some of these small towns, you can just ask, right? You can just ask your electeds or some of the staff members and say, hey, is there a plan for this building? Is there an ad hoc committee going to be put together? Can I be on it? Can I help start it? Because quite frankly, in a lot of these small towns, that's where it starts. It starts with one person who's got the interest, who wants to help out.
Okay. Got another question here talking about the fact, they're asking about the fact that sometimes the adaptive reuse of an existing property is more expensive than the construction of a new property. So what do you say here? Is it how do you know if it's a project that should be retained or if it should be torn down and built as something new?
I think in our case, that's going to be the case. I think it's going to cost us more to renovate the building than it would be to demolition it and then start over. But I'm going to go back to the original point, which is that community connection to the buildings themselves. I think, and all of the things that came along, with the factors of why that was important, the carbon footprint, all of those things become the reason why it still makes more sense to do it this way. At least in our case, that's the case that that I'm making, right? Because for me, it's more about it's more, building the building is necessary, but for me, it's more about the mission and what we're providing. So if you believe in the mission and what we're providing to the community and what we're providing to the people around and the value that that brings, I think it makes more than enough sense to spend the money to build, to make the building, to renovate the building.
Yeah, and all those points that I think Carla and Andrea ran off just as well in the past. You talk about the good bones. Is it a sound foundation, and is the framing and the load-bearing walls and all that other type of stuff. The layout, the favorable layout as far as the floor plate is concerned. So you definitely want to make sure that you don't have a real deep building, because that minimizes the amount of natural light and usable space. So yeah, all those things that were sort of mentioned, and then of course, for me is one of the main things I look at is what type of value or what type of meaning that particular building has to the community as well.
Oh, go ahead, Andrea. Sorry. Oh, and you're muted. I apologize.
Yeah, I was using the space bar. Sometimes that works and sometimes it doesn't. I just want to add, for Eugene's sake, sometimes there are buildings that just aren't right to be preserved. Like, every so often something needs to come down for one good reason or another. If it was a commercial building that was built in the 1980s and it's just, old and falling apart and the floor plates are not conducive to apartments, there are times where the building just should come down. So we have to acknowledge that as well. It's not where we're aiming our attention, but sometimes that's just the reality that we have to accept.
Well, and I was also going to say that every deal is different, and urban development is definitely different than suburban and rural, in terms of the way that construction staging has to happen, and sometimes the permitting is more expensive because there are other components, right? You need police presence, you need to close streets, like things are definitely different developing in different municipalities. But one area that urban municipalities have that actually can be leveraged to make a project, if, to Chris's point, the community really wants to save it and it's a public building, and to Kevin's point, there are really beautiful bones. Even if it's going to be more expensive, maybe the town wants to make other types of concessions, right? Whether those are tax concessions, whether those are building permit concessions.
Yeah,
and the
right.
reality that larger urban municipalities are in a much better position to make those type of deals than some of these small towns, because they have the staff, they have the experience. Sometimes they even have the programming, right? They already have ordinances in place that allow them to make those deals. Whereas in some of these small towns, this is the first time they're ever contemplating it. They have to start from scratch, which could be more challenging. So I think in the urban landscape, you can look at it in a variety of different ways. And just remember that every deal is different, right? Every single deal is unique.
We've got a few more minutes. I'm just going to switch over to infrastructure that connects to the buildings. I often hear about 3-story buildings in towns, in suburban and rural areas, where there's retail on the ground floor and then there were offices above. Those are almost impossible to convert. And I don't know if you've looked at that kind of building, but plumbing and water and sewer is often referenced as an issue. So in that scenario, if you could talk about whether that's ever been a consideration for you, but also just with the projects you've worked on, have you seen projects where it was just cost prohibitive to run the plumbing that's needed for a residential property through a building use for something else?
I can't. Well, I'll just say in general. Yes, when you're looking at converting a commercial space to a residential, it definitely is going to dramatically increase the need for those plumbing risers that are going to run up. And the plumbing riser basically are the pipes for water supply and drainage and all that other type of stuff. So an office floor might have a kitchenette or something like that. So you just got your one sink. You got maybe 2 bathrooms, but in this particular case, now you're looking at 40, or maybe just on the floor. I wouldn't say overall, but on the floor, you might have 10 to 20 or more, 4 kitchens and bathrooms. So that's going to require you to core new holes through the existing concrete slabs. And you got to be careful when you're doing that because you have to avoid like whatever there might be post-tension cables in there. There might be steel structures that you got to navigate and all of that. So that that's technically complex, more time consuming. It adds more cost to the project. So those that is something that you will experience and have to deal with.
Environmental is a big one too. So
Mhm.
once you get in, you start doing demo, you're finding lead and asbestos and all kinds of PCBs and all kinds of things that you thought you tested for, and radon, lead in the drinking water could all be there. And then, of course, on the grounds, when my partner Terry Belkis Mitchell and I worked on a very large mill out in Stonington, and we had phase 1 and a phase 2 and a remedial action plan and all sorts of investigation and brownfield money from the state. And just as we started actually doing the work, we just kept uncovering abandoned underground storage tanks in places that we thought had been tested. Anyway, it ended up adding a tremendous amount of expense and a tremendous amount of time. We had to go back to the state. We needed to get more funding. Fortunately, they were able to provide that. But the surprise is, it's sort of like getting out of the ground on new construction. The surprise is when you actually start opening up a wall, or like you said, Kevin, coring for new chases and things like that. You need to be sort of on guard.
Yeah, and so typically if you're dealing with new construction, you might have a 5%, 10% contingency, but when you're dealing with rehab renovation, dealing with old buildings, you're kicking that up to 20%. And probably with what Andrea experienced, it probably even jump higher than 20% at the end. And she ate up her contingency and had to find more money to address it. Another thing would also be when you think about old buildings is building code conformancy. So that can add a lot of cost to it just as well. So ADA accessibility, fire and life safety type of issues. So yeah.
And that probably comes up even more with a mixed-use property than it does with a residential property, because you've got different requirements for different kinds of spaces too.
Yeah, I would say there's just one thing in terms of infrastructure that I want to say is something I hear frequently from folks as a huge barrier that ends up, at least in our work, actually not being as big of a deal, and that is septic. We work almost exclusively in places that have no sewer system, and we hear frequently, we can't do that project, or in the adaptive reuse case, if you're converting from a commercial use, for instance, you're going to need more septic capacity if you're converting to a residential use. And the reality is that a lot of places can support it. And it's not going to be any sort of, water contamination issue. The technology has come a long way in the last 15 years. And so, if there were one thing that I would want the folks listening to take away from this, is that you can do multifamily affordable housing development even without the infrastructure. And you can do it for a conversion or a new build.
Yeah, and I forgot one other thing that can be an issue is when you're talking about parking requirements, especially in an urban setting. So I know for Waterbury, it wasn't too long ago when they finally decided to address parking requirements in the downtown, minimizing the requirement because of the fact that there were developers coming in and creating housing. So if you can get away from having to build some sort of parking structure to accommodate all of the cars, that's a plus. But of course, if you're not able to, then that's going to be a huge expense. And I know in some cases, for folks who do not like affordable housing in their town, parking always is an issue for them as to what they use as to why this particular project shouldn't be here, because there's no place for them to park and they're going to cause all of this traffic. So that's one of their their plays that they use to try to deny development.
So one last question as we wrap up. LISC is an affordable housing lender. It's one of our roles and hats that we play. When you're thinking about working on an adaptive reuse project, what are you looking for in your lenders and investors, and how do you help them underwrite around the risk of an adaptive reuse project? Do you look at your experience and make sure you have a partner who has experience? Do you sort of think about contingencies or backup plans? Is it different with an adaptive reuse project?
Where's Terry? Andrea?
End the panel and the whole conference by going, I'm not really the finance person, but here I am. I'm going to say that. I mean, Elizabeth, the LISC has been an NEF, been a tremendous partner for us going into situations like that because you've done it before. So, your organizations have done it before. So when it's the surprises, there are surprises all the time. It's what do they say? The known unknowns. Like we know historic, we know environmental, we know community resistance, we know the timeline for applying for financing. Those things are similar, whether it's adaptive reuse or whether it's new construction. And you need your investors and your pre-development lenders to be savvy and realistic with you, because there's nothing worse than getting dinged for if your construction ran over or if your pre-development loan ran out and now you're pleading for mercy. It's a lose for everybody. It just stresses everybody out. It costs a bunch of money. So if we all go into it eyes wide open, knowing what the potential pitfalls can be, we can't always plan for all of them, but we can plan for a lot of them. You need your lenders to be on board with that.
And for someone who's starting out, Chris, you mentioned this was your first project. Are
Right.
there things about funders that you wish you knew before you started?
That's a loaded question.
It's okay. I mean, I think it's hard,
for me, right? I mean, so I've never done this. So the whole process for me is learning and new. I think I remember the architect kind of laughing at the beginning and saying, "Oh, when you go for this particular pot of money, it takes a long time." And then it taking even longer, and him being like, "Well, that's really long." So the waiting, right, in between when you receive money and all the things you need to do, and having the people on your team understand that that's part of it, right? The architect understanding that yes, you do need to wait for this money to come in before we can write you that check. You know that we were approved. You know that it went through bond commissioning and all the processes. We just need to wait for the closing and that to happen. So I think having a team that understands, right? Everybody needs to be patient to make a project like this happen. So I think that goes back to what Andrea said, right? It's kind of that transparency and everybody really understanding what it all means to make it happen. So for me, that it's ongoing. The learning is ongoing, but it's definitely been interesting.
For folks who are new, either on the for-profit developer side or the nonprofit side, you have to be willing to expose your financials, because
Right.
they dig deep into years of record keeping and tax returns, and in our case, where sometimes we're guaranteeing personally. So I've partnered on deals with people who are absolutely appalled, especially if they're doing an RFP site. They have no interest in sharing their personal or corporate financials, and I'll say, well, then you cannot be in this business, because nobody is going to lend you money on a handshake. Those days are long behind us. So it's uncomfortable at first, but you get so used to it. I'm just like, every time, do you have a secure link? Do you have a secure link?
You're right.
You just gotta be willing.
Right.
Okay, well, thank you so much. I think we're right up at 4:00. This was a great conversation. I'm so excited to see these projects get built and visit them. They're really going to be transformative in the communities. So thanks so much.
Thank you so much for having me.
Yep.
That was wonderful, everyone. Could give our speakers a round of applause in the chat? Thank you so much for being here. This was our last session of the day, so this is the conclusion of the Connecticut Affordable Housing Conference. I hope that you all learned something, took something away that you're going to share with someone else. Just a couple of final announcements. Tomorrow morning, you'll receive a post-conference survey, so if you haven't yet filled that out, we did send it out yesterday as well. Please do so. It really helps us understand the impact that the conference has and how we can improve for next year. Hope to see some of you at the reception tonight, starting at 5:30 at the Lyceum. We also have a silent auction ongoing. Final bids are open until 7 p.m. tonight, so please check that out as well. And thank you all so much. Have a great evening.